From training to performing, join our big league conversation. Welcome to the CSP Elite Baseball Development Podcast with your host, Eric Cressey.
Welcome back to the CSP Elite Baseball Development Podcast. I'm Eric Cressey, and we're excited for another episode. We've got Bob Tewksbury here today. He's going to share some insights from the world of mental skills coaching. Before we get to it, I want to remind you that this show is brought to you by Lumberland Company. They've hollowed out the bat barrel and created the coolest drinking mug ever. It's a fully customizable gift that's awesome for the baseball fans in your life, especially with Mother and Father's Days coming up. You can customize these bat mugs with colors, names, logos, or photographs and make them the perfect gift for the baseball fan that you know. What's really cool now is that they're an officially licensed product of the Major League Baseball Players Association, and they have designs available for every team. You can even get the team signature edition, which featured the signatures of the entire 25-man roster. With this bat mug, they're 100% handmade in the USA and designed exactly how you'd like. Personally, I've used them as gifts for baseball folks in my life when I want to say thank you. And to sweeten the deal, they're offering free shipping on 2 or more bat mugs with the code CSP at checkout. Again, if you enter CSP at checkout, you'll get free shipping on your purchase of 2 or more bat mugs. If you head to lumberlend.com, that's LUMBERLEND.com, and design your own bat mug today, you'll get the original bat mug and well represented gift for your baseball fans in your life. Moving forward, I want to introduce today's guest. It's a retired Major League Baseball pitcher who competed in the big leagues from 1986 through 1998 for 6 different teams. He has the lowest ratio of base on balls per innings pitched for any starting pitcher to pitch in the Major Leagues since the 1920s. In 1992, he walked only 20 batters in 233 innings, which was the best ratio in the Major Leagues in over half a century. When all was said and done, he threw over 1,800 Major League Baseball innings. And following the completion of his career, he worked as a pitching consultant for the Red Sox from 1999 to 2003, and then transitioned to a mental skills coach for 2004 to 2013. So that's 3 separate World Championship teams. He then worked for the Major League Baseball Players Association in career development for a year before returning to the Red Sox for 2015 and 16, and then left to head to the Giants and is now with the Chicago Cubs. He earned his bachelor degrees of science in physical education at St. Leo University in 2000 and went on to earn his master's degree in sports psychology and counseling at Boston University in 2004. We're really excited to welcome Bob Tewksbury. Welcome to the show, Bob.
Hey, thanks. It's great to be at Eric Cressey's podcast. Like, you're not busy enough already. It's crazy.
You're not kidding, but we're excited. Thank you for carving out some time. So I'm gonna jump right into it. I read the book last year, 90% Mental, for those who haven't been familiarized with it. I read it on one very drawn out, delayed flight to spring training in Arizona last year. And so I had every opportunity to be cranky about the weather and sitting on a hot flight and being delayed and all that. And instead I left my 7 or 8 hour adventure via airline. Very, very happy because I'd had a chance to go through the book, which was awesome. And what I think was cool about it too, obviously there were really actionable strategies and things like that. I appreciated kind of like your self-deprecating humor about your own career, about you not throwing hard enough and you still stuck around for a long time. So the question I kind of want to start off with is what made you a big leaguer for 13 years and how has it led you to where you are today in the world of mental skills?
Thanks for reading the book, and I'm glad it was helpful to kill some time. I think the ability to do the little things consistently well. I think I had to, because I didn't have a lot of velocity. I had to do the little things well. I had to field my position. I loved fielding my position. So I'd play pepper and always do, little games of that type of activity. I had to work on my command. So I was always refining my mechanics and throwing at an object and And I had to know the hitter's strengths and weaknesses. So I was doing scouting reports, and it's the analytics that are there now. It's pretty crazy. I was going through some notes, or just some notebooks in my office the other day, and I found a logbook that I had from like 1992 or something like that. And I was keeping track of first pitch strikes, how many times I get the leadoff hitter out. If I got a first pitch strike on a hitter, how many times that at bat resulted in an out. What inning I gave up the most runs in, and turned out to be the first inning. So these little things and paying attention to detail, I think, with consistently led to the success. The as you know, the little things aren't so little. They're very important. And then I think that the other thing is just the passion and love of the game. The love of preparation and competing. The feeling of reward of and satisfaction of having a job well done, but also, as much as it stunk at the time, those games where things didn't go as well, that increased motivation for the next time. And that's probably the biggest reason that I retired after 18 professional seasons, was my motivation. My desire to be home was greater than my desire to play. And so you have to, I think, having that passion and that motivation helps make all those other things a lot easier.
Absolutely. So, kind of talk about the impetus for, obviously you went back after your career was done, and you finished up your undergraduate degree at St. Leo, and then you went on to a master's degree in sports psychology and counseling at Boston University in 2004. What was the impetus for going, essentially more clinical in nature? What drew you to the world of mental skills coaching?
Yeah, well, and I know that was the second part of your question. I think so when I was playing, Norman Vincent Peale, The Power of Positive Thinking. If you can see it and believe it, you can achieve it. I in high school I read that and started practicing imagery. Phil Collins's "In the Air Tonight" was my go-to song, and I would picture myself, pitching and playing and succeeding and winning. And so I had that practice, in high school. And then, I think that it probably waned a little bit. Your talent, you can outplay the league for a while until you get to the big leagues. And then you got to find the little things to be sustainable. And that's when, I started Harvey Dorfman's books, Ken Revisa's books, trying to apply the mental aspects of performance, which I needed to refine as well, with negative self-talk. And for me it was, God, do I throw hard enough? Do I belong here? After 6 demotions and 2 surgeries, it's like, am I really good enough to do this? Can I stay? So there's some fear of success, there's fear of failure. And as you know, through the book, I talk about that very candidly. So when I got done playing, I have all these experiences that I'm like, I can share these with somebody. And so I had a conversation with Dan Duquette, who was the general manager for the Red Sox at the time. And I told him I believed in the hardest part about being a major league player. Not the hardest part, one of the hardest parts was the first 3 years of a career, because you have options. They can send you down. You can perform really well and be out of a spot because of roster numbers or a contract or a veteran or whatever. And so I put up a little proposal that said I'd like to be a mentor to some prospects and some young players in the big leagues. And so that's how I got into baseball after retirement. And it was good. We had some young prospects and a couple guys in the big leagues that I talked to. And there was a guy that was with the Red Sox, is Dr. Doug Gardner, who was working for the team and had a couple players, but he's the one that said, BU has a program in sports psych, and I'm like, wow, that'd be pretty cool if I could do that. And as a former player, and but I waited 3 more years, and it was the impetus for this was one night in Pawtucket, Rhode Island. A player came up to me and confided that he had a cocaine problem and he needed help. So I was like, well, you should talk to the EAP. And he said, no, I don't want to talk to the EAP. So I called the Players Association, and Dr. Joel Solomon was the director of the medical then. And I drove him. He got an appointment the next morning. He goes, if you can be in New York tomorrow morning at 8 o'clock, I can see him. So we drove after a night game in Pawtucket to New York City, got a hotel, brought him to his appointment, drove him back before batting practice the next day. And no one ever knew about it for a while. He ended up having some treatment, and this particular player's career kind of unraveled, unfortunately. But it was during that time that I thought, all my playing experience in the world can't help me with this situation. So I need to understand how to handle this better. That was what catapulted me to go to BU and learn, more about proper referrals and how to handle these things. In addition to the applied science of, self-talk and imagery and concentration and visualization and imagery are often interchangeable. But and then I learned about the mechanics of all that, which was really great because even though I was doing it, I understood it better. And so, I was with the Red Sox in '04. They hired me. Unfortunately, they let Doug Gardner go. And he went on to do, I think he's done some great stuff in some NFL teams, and he's had a great career as a private guy. But he, it was his, input into the program. And also Theo Epstein's dad wrote a letter of recommendation. I think he's a professor at BU. So, yeah, and that started at 15 years ago. So I've been doing this almost as long as I played, which is scary. It just means I'm getting older and wiser.
You're like fine wine, right? So, and I think the other thing that's this, there's a stigma historically around the concept of a mental skills coach, and I think that was one of the things I loved, as an aside to the book, was that there was an underlying tone of like, hey, you talked about John Lester and Anthony Rizzo and Andrew Miller, like these are big time guys who have been very successful, all have World Series rings. And they use mental skills coaches all the time. I know the adherence and like the outreach in the Red Sox organization was phenomenal. Even back when we talked about it in 2012, 13, so you're obviously going to get some resistance to this, because of the stigma of a mental skills coach. But can you give me some examples of what you've experienced on that front? How you've overcome it, and even how it's changed over the years from when you first started doing this, 15 years ago.
Yeah. Well, to go back even further, there was no resource for this when I was playing, and I could have used it in New York. So, it was very much culturally, it wasn't something that was talked about, not even within sport, but within society. It was like, you only have to do this if something's wrong with you. And that's still the thing that happens, is like and you don't have to be struggling to work on stuff. And, but so the resistance was, it was definitely new and touchy feely. And like, I don't want to tell anybody that I've had negative thoughts. It's like, I think I tell this story in the book about asking Paul Molitor if he ever loses his confidence. And, here's a guy that's 9th on the all-time hit list. And this is when we were playing together in 97 or 98. And he goes, yeah, if I'm 0 for 12, he said, I feel like I'm never going to get another hit.
That's the thing that blows me away about big league hitters too, is like we talk to guys, in the off season, and it's like, I got no shot against that guy. He's unreal. It's the best arm I've ever seen. Like, and these are like, you hear about it from really like big time guys. There's always like that one pitcher where they don't see him well or whatever it is. And they'll speak like that. No doubt about it.
Yeah. And so and it's well, that's another whole thing with, yeah, you may not have a great chance, but you do have a chance. um, but Molitor just goes to the thinking. Here's a great guy that thought he'd never get another hit, but he had a strategy to get out of that. He said, but if that happens, I hit the ball the right field. I stay inside the ball. I try to hit the ball. I simplify things, or I lay down a bunt for a hit, which psychologically gave him a boost. So that's why he's a Hall of Famer. He had a plan with that, but a lot of people don't. And there's a great, I love the movie. It's called The Peaceful Warrior. Nick Nolte's in it, and it was a book. It was kind of a movie off of Dan Millman's The Way of the Warrior, or maybe even The Peaceful Warrior. But there's a saying in that, change happens from the inside out, but a lot of people are afraid to look on the inside because of what they may find. And that's, I think, a big part of the reluctance for the players, is that they have this, whether it's ego or just the self-identification that, if people only knew how I really felt, they would not think of me the same way. And so it's hard, but it's gotten better, and it's gotten better because the it's been more accepted amongst teams as a resource for players to perform better. So it's becoming more normalized. Colleges are having those. Teams at the lower levels have them. Players are being exposed to the concepts of sports psych earlier, so that when they get to the big leagues, they're aware of it, and they may be more receptive to it than they were in the past. So, but it's really changed a lot, and I think it's going to be really exciting to see where this goes, because of all the research, the continued developments, and the study of the brain, and how the effects like mindfulness, the studies of how beneficial that is. And we kind of always known it, but now the science is illustrating it, and it's going to be really interesting to see where the science takes mental skills in the next few years.
Absolutely. And this was the first off season where we had a free agent who was deciding between 5 or 6 teams, and he actually reached out to me and he was like, "Hey, can you do some digging? I had such a good experience with a mental skills coach at my previous organization that I want this to be a lasting part of where I wind up," where it actually dictated, just as much as compensation or opportunity, kind of where he wound up. So it's been cool to
Oh,
see
that's
it
great.
come about.
Yeah.
And so here's a question for you. So I'm in the fitness industry, obviously. So, we try to instill, progressive, forward thinking training principles that are, based on science and, and logic and individualized evaluations and things like that. And then we can go on Instagram, every afternoon, and we can see, people who aren't qualified giving outrageously, inappropriate advice for people on exercise stuff. So there's a lot of charlatans in an industry where there's a low barrier to entry. And I'm sure you recognize that a little bit in your field too, that there are a lot of people who maybe don't have clinical qualifications, or people that are just, they don't necessarily have a leg to stand on in this concept. What are some of the things that you've seen? What are the big misconceptions about like what good mental skills coaching / sports psychology work really is? What should people be on the lookout for as being really no bueno?
Wow.
Yeah.
Yeah, you're right, and I love your posts, and I love your comments with regard to some of the people that are out there that, and so I think the first one I think is anyone that says they can cure the yips, I think is I think that's misleading. I think that's such a overwhelming ununderstood, or is that a word? Ununderstood?
Misunderstood. There you go. You're close. We knew where you're going.
And I wrote a book, Eric. Ununderstood. Thank God for editors. But I think that that's one thing. Because I think it's so complicated that no one understands it. Another thing is say, well, you just got to think good thoughts. Well, it's not that simple. How do you do that? And what's the application of that? I think that there are no quick fixes. I think that there's a lot of stuff that people say, do this and do that and you'll play better. And it can be very misleading because I think a lot of people, as you know, are so hung up on some results or some end game of a scholarship, a contract, whatever it is, that they'll do anything if it makes them feel better. But the feel better doesn't always mean it's the best thing to do, because I don't think a lot of it's not sustainable. So, this is really a good question because I've never been asked that before. So I'm kind of searching for an answer, but, quick fix solutions don't work.
Yeah. It's like any other training principle. It's like exercise. You can't just do it for a day. You've got to do it for a lifetime.
Yeah. Yeah. So, consistent thoughts lead to consistent routines. And, I think that anything less than that, is just not valid. And how do you get to those consistent thoughts? And the other thing is just really being, I think, it's really being honest with the client, and I think that's where some people working in the field that want to get professional athletes or work for a team that covet that may be starstruck and not be able to have that honesty that really needs to have happen so that you develop that trust and build a relationship. And the other thing that happens, and this is a big part in the field, is practicing within one's competency. And I think that, I have a master's degree in sports psychology. I can't and don't diagnose, treat, any of that stuff. I refer clinical issues to the clinicians, and I work in applied sport psych. And I think that, and that's what I learned because of that incident with the player in Pawtucket. And referrals, go to marriage counseling or individual counseling, anxiety, depression, drug abuse, substance abuse. And so I think that there are some people who maybe, can tend to within the industry may be practice outside their bounds, which happens. But I also think there are some clinicians who don't have a sports psych background that say that they do sports psych. And, I'm not sure that they may have their medical training, but because they played at college soccer doesn't mean that they're trained in sports psych. And I think that happens sometimes too. So it goes both ways. And I think the industry is really at a point now where we're trying to govern all that, just like the training that you guys have had for strength and conditioning and nutrition. And, there's got to be standards, right? And
Absolutely.
Those standards have to be upheld.
So, the interesting about it. So, I always wonder, and I keep drawing these parallels with strength and conditioning and what you do is that, there's always low hanging fruit, right? So we get someone who's completely detrained in a fitness, standpoint, and aerobic exercise is like the lowest hanging fruit. It's incredibly easy to do. You can get amazing adaptations, weight loss, just, improve cognition, all these magical things when you just get, someone who's completely sedentary and you start walking. So it's the lowest hanging fruit, maybe from a physiological standpoint. And certainly strength training can make a big deal if someone hasn't lifted weights. It can have a powerful impact on body composition and functional capacity and all this stuff. There's got to be low-hanging fruits in the world of mental skills, sports psychology. So, you get that, 16-year-old kid or the 21-year-old college player or even the, the minor leaguer. Like when those guys have had no exposure to mental skills training, where do you start? What's the lowest hanging fruit for those guys?
Yeah. Being aware of their thoughts and, and I think identifying that voice in their head is just that's a voice in their head. I do have some private clients. I have a college, I have a junior in high school as a baseball player in West Virginia that wants to be a D1 guy. And for him, it's, more effort should equal to more results. Perfectionist, I have to do this. I have to do that. So we talk about having realistic goals with him, like what's reasonable, and because he is a confident kid. There's another client and it's a college pitcher that doesn't have conviction in his pitches, and it's because he's on the mound saying, don't walk this guy. I hope I don't. The coach is going to get mad. So his is more related to, controlling his thoughts and focusing on what I call anchor statements or the task at hand. So the low hanging fruit is like, what's the first, what's the, it could be multiple fruits, but what's the first thing that you feel like is hanging you up? To identify that, and then to build a system around that. Okay, look, this is, we're talking about goal setting, but now let's talk about your self-talk related to the goals. And let's talk about how to implement an imagery program as part of your routine. Let's talk about keeping a journal of, the things that you did well, so that you realize that, you're not perfect, but you've done a lot of things well. So, so it depends on the client, but it does vary. Well, actually, I tell the, and I'm sure you do too, and work with the athletes, but the young clients, I'm like, the big leaguers have the same thoughts that you do, and they're like, no way, I'm like, oh yeah. So you normalize it that, everyone's in this struggle, but yeah, I think that the low hanging fruit is just that, um, normalizing it that, hey, this is, other people have these thoughts, and then they go, oh wow, it's not only me.
Yeah, and that was the powerful thing. First and foremost about the book was that you could identify these are very successful people who have dealt with struggles and use these approaches to overcome them, and keep them at bay. It's not something that just goes away. You keep working on it like anything else.
Mm-hmm.
How does the work, building on that last question, how does the work with high school, college, pro athletes differ? Do you see certain tendencies in different populations? And obviously, pro players have marriages and they have contract
Mm-hmm.
negotiations and things like that. What are the big rocks in each one of those populations?
Yeah, well, the young player, the high school kids, they, I think there's a parental influence to this,
Yeah,
that has to be navigated, Uh, and oftentimes the reality is, is the kid playing because he loves it, or is he playing because he feels like it's going to make mom and dad happy? And so understanding that difference, and then from a personal perspective, is understanding that there's different maturity levels that you really have to understand where where this kid's coming from, and what he's ready for and what he's not ready for. The college kids are focused on, getting dealing with things out of their control, playing time, innings pitched,
scouts, you name it. Yeah,
yeah, velocity, scouts, they're dealing with so many external things that it's getting them to really focus on what's going on. And so there's, because they want to be the pro, and then the pros are trying to get to the big leagues, but the minor league pros are really receptive and open to ideas and suggestions, and will work on it, and they don't worry about what people think, because they're trying to get there. The big league pros are oftentimes more guarded because of, contract negotiations. Can they really trust you because you
yeah,
work for the team? And you and I have had that
yeah,
conversation multiple
yeah.
times. The trust factor of being a team employee. So it changes. There's always a bump along the way, and I'm still learning how to navigate them. But the more people that you see and talk to, the better that becomes. So that's what's exciting about this, is every client is a new opportunity to learn something.
Absolutely. So let's talk about too. This isn't just players listening, but we also have coaches, we have parents,
Hmm.
and of all levels. Like we'll have professional coaches and we'll have t-ball coaches. What are some of the things that coaches and parents can watch out for in up and coming athletes to say, hey, like obviously everybody can benefit from this in some capacity, but what are the things to watch for to say, hey, this might need to be escalated a little bit quicker to someone who can help?
Well, I think just general overall happiness,
Yep.
is one thing that comes to mind. I remember speaking at your event,
Yeah, absolutely.
and he's still a client. I
Yep.
just talked to him yesterday.
Yeah.
And yeah, it was so prominent that the young man, said, well, I'm not having any fun because the coaches don't make it fun. And I was like, that was such a striking thing to me. And
And he
so I
was young.
think,
He was 13,
yeah,
right? I want to say at the time.
he was
Maybe a little.
12. He's
Yeah,
14
crazy.
now.
That's
Yeah, yeah,
unbelievable to me. Yeah.
yep. So that one thing with regard to the parents is, letting go of any expectation and enjoy the fact that your son or daughter is able to compete at a level. Don't try to keep up with the Joneses. If your son is good enough, there's a saying that I think still holds true. If they're good enough, they'll find you.
Mhm.
The select teams and the special stuff always don't equate to, or often doesn't equate to the end result. That's why youth sports a $15 billion industry.
Yeah.
And what are they searching for? So I think the parents having realistic goals and expectations, and don't coach from the sidelines. I hate coaching from the sidelines. The
Mhm.
kids can't hear you. It does no good. It only frustrates people. I understand it's anxiety provoking to be a parent and watch your kids play. I had two kids play through college. I get it, but it just really it's not about you. It's about them. Enjoy whatever they do, and respect the coaches. Coaching's a hard gig.
Yeah.
It's really hard. That people, oftentimes they're volunteering and they're doing the best they can, especially at the youth levels. They may not have formal training or have played the sport, but they're volunteers and they're doing the best they can. And don't compare them to Terry Francona. Uh, you know, um, but the coaches can also get educated. They can learn how to, how to better themselves and not do it just because that's what the coaches have always done. I had a client that just told me yesterday. He was a high school kid that the coach took him out of a game because he struck out, and the coach yelled at him like, I can't believe you struck out or something that he said. And he goes, Coach, I wasn't trying to. And the coach took him out of the game, and the guy missed the sign, and he took him out of the game. And it's just this type of coaching is archaic,
Yep.
and it's not appropriate now at any level. So coaches can be educated on how to coach, how to talk to kids, how to set a standard of behavior within their team. And there's so many things that coaches can do to just help these kids, regardless of the outcome of the game. That it's really a powerful position, and that's at every level. And I think there's the reason why some of these Krzyzewski and the basketball coaches that have been there for a long time are there, because I think that you can tell the people that come out of there, they're getting more than just basketball or football for that matter. So so the coaches, parents can relax, let the kids play, support them. Coaches can learn more about coaching, understanding that it's a tough job for sure. And that I'm sure that, they love the game. That's why they're still doing it. But, good coaching is such an important thing and so valuable for the development of the kids.
It's interesting hearing
So
you saying that. There was an interesting quote from Frank Martin, who was the women's basketball coach at South Carolina, and he said, "You know what makes me sick to my stomach when I hear grown people say that kids have changed. Kids haven't changed. Kids don't know anything about anything. We've changed as adults. We demand less of kids. We expect less of kids. We make their lives easier instead of preparing them for what life is truly about. We're the ones that have changed." It's. I like the fact that there's a level of ownership with what coaches need to do. We need to hold kids to a higher standard, but at the same time, like, kids have enough failure in their lives, especially in a sport like baseball as a hitter, where you fail 70% of the time and you're one of the best of all times. Is that a challenge that you're always dealing with, is just, the constant struggle to push negativity out for guys as they work through their career?
yeah, well, I agree with them.
Yeah.
Oh, they've changed, they've changed. Well, every generation has changed.
Mm-hmm.
My era of playing was different. They said that about us, and so it's part of, yeah, things change, but I don't think people change. I think people are like black labs, Eric. If you're nice to them and you give them food and you pay attention and you encourage them, they'll run laps for you. And I think that's our nature. And when that doesn't happen, through parenting or coaching or whatever it is, that's when issues happen. And I really think that, I mean, this is really getting off the deep end, but, teaching parents to be better parents, and that's a complicated issue that goes generations, but that's the root of this. And then the coaches are an extension of that. So, there is a lot of negativity. I think that the world has changed, and when everyone, even the veteran coaches, these kids don't listen anymore. No, it's not them. Maybe it's how you're sending the message, because how you used to send the message 15 years ago is different now. And the people, through technology, people have changed. The use of the phones, their habits, their behaviors, the lack of free play, the lack of parks, and things have changed. But I think people are still the same. And if you treat them nice with respect, and you, as I said in the book, Joe Torre gave me permission to succeed, it goes a long way.
Absolutely. And I spoke incorrectly. Frank Martin's actually the men's basketball coach at South Carolina. Not that it changes the course of the message, but building on that. So let's talk hitters versus pitchers. So obviously you pitched yourself and have a ton of experience in that realm. Did you find that you had pushback from hitters because they saw you as a guy who only communicated with pitchers, or was it just that, you had to frame your discussions a little bit differently to get through to them?
No, I think that, once they, it's interesting because the quick answer to that is no. And I think that naturally there's a natural tie-in because I pitched. But also, that perspective of pitching, I can relate to the hitter by saying, look, I know how hard this is. And, I've been at the plate. It wasn't very good, but I've been at the plate. I know how hard this is. So what are your controllables? And, and that pitchers make mistakes, and to think of when a hitter talks about being anxious with guys on second and third, trying to drive in the run, I go, as a pitcher, he's not feeling too good either, So you're putting the pressure on you, but the pressure can be on the pitcher too. So it's a matter of perspective, and perspective plays a huge part in this game.
Absolutely. So building on that, so I know that you aren't just dealing individually with players, right? You're also dealing in an organizational context. So a lot of that is managing a clubhouse dynamic. What to you makes a great teammate? What are the things that you see of guys that are, we always hear about like the David Rosses of the world. What are the things that you look for in your work with the Cubs and previously the Giants and the Red Sox that have really made a big difference for organizations?
Yeah, well, I think, I was part of the 2013 team, and that was such a great David Ross, Johnny Gomes, Napoli, PV came over. They kind of tied into this, and the thing that sticks out with all those guys is getting outside of yourself and keeping people accountable and being accountable yourself, and appropriately challenging people when, they don't do things that are the right things to do it the right way. Number one. And I think, caring about winning, not being selfish to the guys, David Ross is a great example of that. His job is to win and support other people. And, but what players don't understand is that's reciprocal. When you treat other people that way, you're treating yourself that way. And that's why parenting can be so fun, because, right, you're giving love to your child, and it's like, oh, I love having kids. There's challenges, but you feel good when you do that. So those are the guys. And I think, Terry Steinbach comes to mind, catcher with the Twins, had a great career and just was always there for people, kept people accountable, people respected him. And, you have those guys that you just would do anything for, and he was one of them.
Absolutely. And do you think that, I mean, obviously the game's even a little bit different now just because of the sheer volume of dollars, they're in Major League Baseball, as compared to the 80s and 90s. Do you think that you can change a guy at that level? There's a joke, you can't take the spots off a leopard. When we
Hmm.
when we see an athlete, at that high a level, is it possible to change it, or guys, are who they are?
No, I think it can change.
Mm-hmm.
I do believe that there's an innate character traits and there's innate um, mindset. But I think you know well, the Carol Dweck's book mindset was great because the growth mindset and there's uh, a closed mindset. And so I think that people can, to some degree, it may not be with regard to performance. It may be with regard to um, controlling, having a relationship off the field with their spouse because they're so amped up all the time that when they're there, they're not there. It may be helping them change their behaviors a little bit. I think that the buy-in to, um, well, even I'll answer that even with Lester. So
Mm-hmm.
Lester, in the book, we talk about, there's this chapter on imagery and what he used, um, and he was always reluctant to that. And the story in the book is we were in the Oakland Coliseum and he's struggling a little bit. And he goes, "Hey, what do you got for me?" And I'm like, "John, I've known you for 5 years. The only thing we haven't done is imagery." He goes, "Well, let's try it." And it's become part of his routine. And so he was open to that. But the player, I think it depends on if they have a growth mindset and
Mm-hmm.
are open to change, they can change.
Mm-hmm. And there's an interesting book. Have you read The Captain's Class?
No.
It's an awesome book. And what they did was they looked at some of the best teams of all time. They looked at the Brazilian national team with Pele. They looked at Michael Jordan's Bulls. A lot of these teams. And what they talk about in the book pretty extensively is that very rarely in the history of the sport or any sport has the best player also been the captain. And that being the absolute
Hmm.
stud. They talk about how Cartwright was actually the captain on a lot of those Bulls teams when Jordan was the best player, because it's just too much for the best player to always be the best player in the locker room, and at the same time have to manage a lot of those behind the scenes dynamics that make you a really, really good captain. Is that something that you've seen or ever really thought about, or even I guess prescribed to?
That the best players aren't always the captain.
Yeah.
Yeah. Um, yeah. I think that doesn't have to be. I
Mm-hmm.
think that even, you look at the captain's kind of look, the best players in high school and college become the captains.
Yeah.
But when you look at the glue of a team and what makes it work, if the team's going to be good with or without I mean,
Mm-hmm.
is going to be good with the captain
Yep.
and probably, I'm trying to say with the best player, obviously he's better. But
Yeah.
if you take away that other guy, the guy that's the glue, the
Mm-hmm.
captain's not as good and no one else is. So, I mean, the team is not as good and no one else is. So, no, I totally agree with that. And I think it's very interesting. Those complementary
Yeah.
players are what wins championships. It's not the star player.
Absolutely. So I want to delve in a little bit about kind of like you touched on imagery a little bit, and read some books kind of in this regard last year. And one of the themes that kind of popped up is there's kind of a difference between just fantasizing and thinking more positively versus like actually investing in things that make you happier. And the couple of examples they talked about is that if you have, there was a study of overweight women who fantasized about being skinny and they were less likely to lose weight. Another one, there were post-surgery patients who they fantasized about the recovery, but they'd actually slowed the improvement of their condition. And they've done this with people who perform worse on tests, and they've
Hmm.
even seen stuff that decrease people's odds of entering new romantic relationships just by fantasizing. So there's this mindset that positive thinking lets us feel successful transiently, but doesn't necessarily give us an actual plan to be successful long term. What's the difference between what we hear about in those studies versus like what you're putting into action with the athletes you're actually working with?
Well, you said a key word is a fantasy.
Yeah.
And that to me is just that. There's no substance behind it. I think if you, I bet if you look, imagery works, and if you imagine, the behaviors associated with losing weight, like getting out and eating better and exercising and doing the activity. You have to do the activity. Fantasy is just a fantasy. So, these things, as we know, it's, like you said, attitudes and change aren't something you do once in a while. It's something you have to do every day.
It has to be process, not outcome.
Totally. It's always, well, it's like, I fantasize about winning the lottery, and if I fantasize about winning the lottery, I'm going to be poor because I'm going to spend all these money on tickets and nothing's going to happen. Right. So, but it's about action. You're right. It's about daily activities, consistent thoughts, consistent beliefs with an end game, which could be an image. I would say, a fantasy is not real, but an image, a concrete image of an attainable goal, and then setting up a plan to make that happen. That's goal setting. That works.
And the plan is what lets you trust your process, knowing that if it's a 7:00 start time at 5:37, this is what I'm doing, this is what I'm thinking. Or if you're Anthony Rizzo going up for an at-bat, you know exactly what your pre-at-bat process is.
And more, and just as importantly, is that if your routine is askew for some reason, that you trust that all your prior plans, prior activities, prior routines are going to give you a chance to compete in that moment. If I don't have time to get loose and I have to pinch hit and I don't have my swings and I don't have my, lucky shirt on, I still need to go out and compete. And that's where from past routines, you go, look, I've done this before because I've practiced it 1,000 times. I don't need to have it perfect conditions in which to do this.
Absolutely. So, obviously your book is outstanding and I can't recommend it highly enough. We'll link to it in the show notes. What are some other books that you've enjoyed that you think would be, good reads for the athletes, parents, coaches that are listening?
Yeah. Well, I mean, I always love, Tim Galloway's The Inner Game of Tennis is really a powerful book that's been read multiple times. Certainly Dorfman's books on baseball are really good. Ken Revisa, the late Ken Revisa's baseball books are good. I like Terry Orlick's In Pursuit of Excellence is a book that really breaks down mental skills, and it's a good book to learn from. A couple of books that I like that are just fun reading about performance. One is Clutch, and the other one's Choke by Sarah Baylock, I believe, that talks about performance and and it's really interesting. It makes, analogies to, so you want to be a millionaire and other events that are non-sporting events and performance. So those are good, and I've enjoyed those. But I'll have to check out your Captain. What was that one?
Captain's Class.
Captain's Class. Yeah.
All right. Yeah. That's you gave me a bunch of reading for the next 6 months for my long drive from Florida back to Massachusetts. So you're rocking some audiobooks. So
nice.
With that said, as we're closing up, folks can learn more about you and your services at bobtewksbury.com.
That's right.
They can find you on Instagram. It's btewksbury39. And then they can buy the book, 90% Mental, at Amazon, correct?
That's right. And
Awesome.
I'm on Twitter. I think it's at Bob_Tewksbury.
Perfect.
So, but hey, what a thrill, man. This is great. Love being on your show. Keep up the good work. This is awesome. Someday I want to fantasize about being able to lift as much weight as you. How's that going to work?
I don't know. I'm on the slow decline. I'm just pulling the parachute these days. So
yeah, right.
But we appreciate you coming on. This is awesome stuff. And I know a lot of players, coaches, parents, folks around the game are really going to benefit from what you shared. So thanks for taking the time.
You got it, Eric. My pleasure.
Thank you for joining us for another episode of the CSP Elite Baseball Development Podcast. If you enjoyed this episode, we'd be thrilled if you'd consider subscribing to the podcast and leaving us a review to read on iTunes. We welcome your suggestions for future guests and questions just email elitebaseballpodcast@gmail.com. Thank you for your continued support, and we'll see you next episode.